So my name is Wendy Schaefer, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Operations with the Omnia Group. And today we're going to be talking about behavioral interviewing and learning all you can from someone you just met. I was thinking about this the other day. With interviewing, you really have to make a decision so quickly. You're going to interview somebody for maybe 1, 2, or even 3 face-to-face interviews that last anywhere from 30 minutes to 1 hour. So maybe you're spending 3 hours with a candidate tops, and you have to make this huge decision. You're making this huge decision on who to hire. Now, you definitely wouldn't marry somebody after 1 or 2 dates, but with interviewing, we are going to be spending 5 to 6 figures a year on someone that you're probably going to end up spending more time with than you do with your spouse. So today, we're going to try to use all the tools that we possibly can to make a good hiring decision. And one of the tools that we'll use today is behavioral interviewing, how to ask those questions to get the most information from your candidate and give you the advantage when you're interviewing to learn everything that you can. So thank you again for joining us today. My name is Wendy Schaefer. I've been with Omnia for about 20 years, so a long time. I'm also married to a small business owner, so I get that perspective of what happens in businesses when you don't have an HR department and you literally have to do everything. And interviewing, like anything else, is a skill. And it's often a skill that no one teaches us. So we kind of fumble around and learn as we go. So today we're going to hone that skill. So let's start off. So first off, I'm going to have you take a little poll. And looking at these 3 candidates, which one would you hire? Bring the poll up here. So just go ahead, there's multiple choice. Would you hire candidate A, B, or C? And by the way, I love that closet. I want that closet. Okay. So it looks like the majority of you are picking candidate B. We have 63%, candidate C at 31%, candidate A at about 5%. So I put this up here just to talk about impressions, first impressions, and how we're judging individuals when they come in. But a lot of times the candidate is the one that has the home field advantage when they're interviewing. And the reason that is because if you Google like how to interview, you're literally going to get something like 1 billion hits in about 40 seconds. So if you want to try that now, Google it on your phone, see how many hits you get. And all of those hits are how to help the candidate do well in the interview. There's not a lot out there that talks about how to help the manager make the best hiring decision. So all of this advice is helping your candidate. So the great thing about that is that they should be very prepared in an interview. But the bad thing is that they might be too prepared, where they're sort of faking it till they make it. So they're going to go on there, they're going to know exactly how to shake hands, what to wear, what questions you're going to ask, what to talk about in terms of their strengths and challenges. So we want to take back that advantage a little bit, and behavioral interviewing is the best way to do that. So we're just going to level that playing field, sorry about that, and have a hiring strategy so that from the time you have an opening until you onboard them, you know exactly what you're going to do. And we'll talk about hiring process a little bit. I'm going off slide to do that just because I think it's so important to have a process before you start. So always make sure first and foremost that you have a job description for the position that you're hiring for. Second, when you're doing that, think about what you need and want in your ideal candidate. From hard skills to behaviors, if you were putting together that perfect candidate, who would you pick and what items would you pick from that list? So if you're hiring a salesperson, for example, you might say, I want somebody who's a strong closer. If you're hiring a service person, you might say, I want somebody with great attention to detail. So list that out so you know what to listen for as you're interviewing your candidates. And we're going to go over behaviors in a few minutes. We'll start with behaviors because the key to behavioral interviewing is understanding what to listen for so that you know what behaviors they're going to bring to the job. Third, you definitely want to commit to that process. So if you don't already have one, you really want to start thinking about that and bringing a plan in place. If you have consistency in your selection process, it's going to make everything go so much smoother. And we'll focus again today on interview questioning. And then if you have more information, you want more information about process, please do let us know. One of the handouts at the end is how to design a process, so you'll be able to take that home at the end. So let's talk about the secret weapon for interviewing. Oops, that slide. Sorry about that. So when you're interviewing a job candidate, you want to look at all the tools at your disposal. Right now, this is coming up a little funny. It's supposed to be a pie chart. There are different pieces of the puzzle when you're hiring somebody. So the first would be, let's say, education, work experience, and skills, hard skills, which would be about 25% of your hiring decision. So depending on what position you're hiring for, you might need a certain level of education, you might need some sort of certification, hard skills, whatever that might be, or you might be training on the job for certain things as well. Some other things that you would use would be background testing, which would be about 5% of your overall hiring decision. Social media is a really big thing too right now. So looking at LinkedIn profiles, examining that. And then behavioral assessments and the interview impression are going to be the biggest piece of that hiring pie. Your interview impression takes about 30% and then behavioral assessment 25%. So we're going to talk about those two things today. So because business, when we're talking about people, I mean, business is run by people. They are going to be assisting your customers, finding new customers, entering information accurately into your database, working on your technology and keeping your finances straight. So really it's all such important stuff. So you want to hire the best possible person for each job, and people are at the center of that. So we're going to start by understanding what motivates and drives your people. And that way you can pick the best person and manage them effectively. So ultimately, we're going to talk about the behavioral assessment. That's what Omnia does. So we'll start with the 4 behaviors that we measure. There are 4 drivers in an individual's personality type that really plays into what they bring to the job and work tasks. And those behaviors are assertiveness, communication, pace, and structure. And we're going to break those down and learn a little bit about what motivates the people on your team now, what motivates job candidates. By understanding a candidate's preferences and comparing those preferences to the job requirements, you can more easily discern if that person's going to be a strong fit for you. And the big thing to remember when we're talking about people and behaviors is that there is no right or wrong way to be. There's no wrong answer here. We are who we are. And we would just prefer to spend the majority of our time on tasks that gel with our personality type. And that's why behavioral interviewing is so important. Because if you were to hire somebody, for example, who is very social and loves to talk to people and interact with people, and you put them in an office where they're entering data 8 hours a day, then that's not going to gel with their personality type, and they're going to be unhappy and they might burn out. So by understanding drivers, we can pick people who will like every aspect of the job. Well, most aspects of the job. I know there's always going to be something that we do that's not our favorite thing in any job. But one of the things that you would use is a behavioral assessment, and we would advise you to administer that to all candidates before the first interview so that you're getting a very clean read on them. They don't have any preconceived notions from when you talk to them. And a lot of assessments you would simply run on your short list and see how to design the follow-up interview. So we'll talk about that. But let's move on to the 4 behavioral drivers. We're going to break each of them down. But the first one is assertiveness. So level of assertiveness, there's a scale, if you will. And some people are going to fall on the high side of that scale and be very assertive, and others are going to fall on the low side of the scale and be a little bit more non-assertive and cautious. And so while we're talking about these, I'm going to primarily put them in the context of a salesperson, a leader, or a customer service rep, because those 3 jobs are found in almost every company. And so in one way, shape, or form, you're going to have somebody who helps your customers, somebody who finds your customers, and somebody who leads people. So with assertiveness, the first end of the scale is somebody who is strongly assertive. We tend to say they're a little bit me-oriented. They're competitive, self-starting. They enjoy a challenge. They are comfortable with risk. So your highly assertive candidates are typically the ones you're looking for sales and management positions. So with sales, you want somebody who is comfortable working in a commission environment, who is looking to set themselves apart, who's not afraid to push for what they want, ask for what they want, negotiate on behalf of your organization, ask for that sale, and be driven to keep doing that all the time. Also with leaders, it's sometimes important to have a very strong level of assertiveness. That way, you've got somebody who is comfortable leading people, dealing with confrontation, addressing performance challenges head on. You want somebody who is comfortable delivering bad news, if you will, helping develop people if they're having struggles in their job. And typically a high level of assertiveness is perfect for that. The other side of the spectrum would be somebody who is cautious, supportive, and non-assertive. So they're very helpful, they're collaborative, they enjoy working towards group and team goals, and they're motivated by that opportunity to move everybody along in the process versus setting themselves apart in a competitive way. So often the non-assertive personality is a perfect fit for your customer service jobs, administrative support, kind of backbone positions too, like maybe an IT help desk, a programmer, accounting, anything that might be more of an individual contributor type of position. This is a great trait for that because they're very team oriented and they really want to help others achieve their goals. Now, you really want to look at your job and environment too when you're deciding what the level of assertiveness should be, because oftentimes we might look at a management position and go, okay, this is a manager, they're managing 5 people, they need to be highly aggressive. And that might not always be the case. I'm actually not a tall column 1 individual. I'm talking in Omnia speak. I am not a highly assertive individual. I fall more on the lower end of that scale in the non-assertive range. But I do manage people. I manage a very small team of like-minded people. So we're all very similar in our level of assertiveness. We are all conflict avoidant, a little socially reserved, perfectionists. So we spend our days writing profile assessments. That's what we're doing day in, day out. So really, I mean, how much trouble can we get into? And that's probably what they were thinking when they said, okay, Wendy, you can manage this team. I say that just to point out that some traits are better overall for certain jobs, but you still want to look at your culture and decide what the day-to-day is like. So in my example, though I'm managing a sizable team, that group doesn't require a lot of assertiveness because we're just a very calm group. So if they were managed by somebody who was highly aggressive, it could end up chasing them off in the long run. So you want to look at that as well. And when we look at examples of highly assertive people, I always think of pop culture like Darth Vader would be somebody who's strongly assertive, a big leader, does what it takes, or Miranda Priestley, if you've seen that movie. With the column twos, I always think of, I don't know, Marty McFly's father. I think it was George McFly, somebody who is very cautious and avoids risk. And the next column that the next traits that we measure are communication style. And this is whether or not somebody is more kind of extroverted, introverted. So socially assertive people love to interact with others, and they derive their energy from talking with, interacting with people. So working in teams, helping customers on the phone, face-to-face meetings. They really are motivated by that social interaction. They need recognition. They tend to make decisions based on what feels right. They're reading the room, reading the emotions. They connect well with other people. So communication style is huge when you're looking at candidates for certain positions like sales. If you know that your sales job is very relational and that people buy because they have a relationship and a connection with the sales rep, then finding somebody who is socially assertive might be very important. On the other side of the spectrum, you have your analytical thinkers, those that are very practical, logical, want proof. They're objective. They're looking at the concrete information in order to solve a problem. They're often good listeners. They're observing what's going on. They're sort of internalizing information in order to make a decision. So there are lots of positions where an analytical thinker would be very important. The first with the socially assertive, oftentimes, like we said, we talk about that in sales, or leadership, somebody who can motivate a group of people and looks to build up and inspire. Whereas analytical thinkers look to solve problems. What do I see that's wrong and how can I fix it? So oftentimes you'll see analytical thinkers in jobs like customer service, which might seem a little counterintuitive because they are working with people all day. But depending on your customer service job, do you want a strong listener who really has to analyze complex problems and really needs to listen for all of the details in order to do that? Or are you needing somebody who is more social, upbeat, enthusiastic as a presenter or communicator? So you're looking at your job in your culture to determine what you need communication style-wise. With sales and management, it can go either way. I always like to say that when we're looking at sales, the most important thing is that you have somebody who is assertive, somebody who can close business. With communication style, socially assertive versus analytical really just changes how they sell. So it's almost like baking a cake. If you have a cake and you want to make it, you need flour and sugar. Those would be key ingredients. So you have to have assertiveness to have a great salesperson, somebody who can close and is competitive. But the communication style is kind of like the flavoring, whether you're having, say, chocolate or vanilla cake. I can have somebody who is really great at establishing rapport, or I can have somebody who might be more consultative as a salesperson. I think some great examples of high communication style, socially assertive people would be like Michael Scott from The Office. He wants to be liked, he wants to be in the middle of things. And I think Leslie Knope from the Parks and Recreation is another example of an eternal optimist. She's very social, loves to look at the bright side of everything. So your highly social people are like that. Your fours, I think great examples of that would be Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. He is very analytical. He likes to focus on the facts. He speaks, he's definitely reserved socially. Some other people that would be analytical thinkers would be like Spock and Sherlock Holmes, examples of that analytical type. So thinking about your position can determine what would be the best fit there. The next thing that we're going to look at is pace and adaptability. In pace and adaptability, you're going to have individuals who are fast-paced, multitasking. They handle interruptions really well. They're comfortable jumping from task to task, and they don't get bored with too much predictability. So if the job that you're hiring for is in a hectic environment, they have to jump around, they can't always finish what they start, and they have to be comfortable with that start and stop mentality, then you would want somebody with a high pace multitasking like Friday. So on that end of the spectrum, that's what you're looking for. The other side are individuals who like routine. They're patient, methodical, one thing at a time kind of people. So they don't like things to happen at the last minute. Those would be positions like customer service, oftentimes, depending on the volume of calls that are coming in and what other tasks they have to do as they're taking phone calls. A data entry clerk is definitely an example of a position that's very routine oriented and requires that ability to focus on one thing at a time and a high level of persistence. So a lot of times you're looking at your environment and when you're determining what type of individual you want, because there are plenty of positions where having that persistent and methodical approach to tasks is very important. For example, accounting. Somebody who is systematically processing numbers work all day, oftentimes you see that they are the individuals that are very patient, routine oriented. Where in sales, for example, that high pace tends to be very important, especially if it's field sales where they're out there setting appointments and then they've got prospects calling in to change their appointment times, cancel, reschedule, and you want somebody who's comfortable jumping around like that. So looking at your culture, you would determine the best pace and adaptability for the role. I think of, if I'm going to use some pop culture icons, it was a little bit difficult to do here, but with pace, somebody high-paced multitasking, I was thinking like a James Bond type. I mean, this is an individual who definitely rolled with every situation and thought quickly on their feet. And then for patience, and I don't know if anybody's seen this movie, The Princess Bride, and Inigo Montoya, he was so patient waiting for his time to avenge his father. So what does the job require and how fast-paced do they need to be? So the next thing that we measure is need for structure. And this is really important in, when we're talking about sales and leadership and customer service and support roles. Some individuals fall on the side of the spectrum where they like independence. They're very big picture oriented. They're decisive. They are resilient. And so they don't like to have a lot of guidelines to follow, kind of give me the outline of what I need to do, and I'll run with it and I'll show you the results. That allows them typically to be very good decision makers, and they deal well with ambiguity, which is great. Oftentimes in sales positions, if you've got like field sales and they're out there on their own, they don't have a sales manager necessarily to turn to right when a prospect is asking a question that they're not familiar with. So you want somebody who can deal well with that ambiguity, make a decision, and move forward. People who fall on this side of the spectrum where they like independence tend to be big picture focused. Rather than focusing on the details, they're looking at the overall. So oftentimes salespeople. So I'm just looking at making this sale, and then the post-sale service work is going to go to the admin team and the customer service team. So oftentimes there can be a lower attention to detail in that type of individual. But on the plus side, they're very resilient, which is a key need for sales and for leadership. They can brush off rejection, they can brush off setbacks, and that's definitely what you want in a sales personality or leadership personality. The other side of the coin would be somebody who likes structure. They're very structure oriented. What that means is that they'll follow the rules, they're procedural, they play by the guidelines, and they dot every I and they cross every T. They're detail oriented and quality conscious. And this is so important in, let's say, a customer service position or an administrative support position. You want somebody who's not going to go off book, who's going to follow the policies, especially let's say if we have any insurance listeners out there and you've got a customer service rep who needs to follow policy guidelines as they're answering questions from insureds. And then filling out the post-call documentation, making sure they solve the problem correctly. All of this is so important. So we're going to look for, is this candidate independent or structured? And then what does the job require? So we'll go into our first poll here, our second poll. Just a little quiz on what are some behaviors after we've learned the 4 drivers of personality. What are some behaviors that you would look for in a customer service rep in your company? And what are some behaviors you would look for in a sales professional in your organization? And these might differ a little bit depending on the market, depending on the size of your organization, the product that you're selling. So let us know what you would look for in a customer service professional and what you would look for in a sales professional. Great, so for customer service, we have some awesome answers here. Logical thinker, organization, problem solver. So a lot of this is what we were talking about with communication style, somebody who has, that concrete thinking style. Of course, empathy, being personable, that's great. Patience and multitasker. So that's a great thing to look at because everybody's organization is going to be different. Some customer service jobs are extremely hectic. You've got call times to watch for. You might have calls on hold and you want somebody who doesn't get flustered by that. Or patient, because it might be a customer service position where you're really focusing on the quality of the time that you spend. So for example, if it's a consulting firm, you might need to spend an hour on a phone call in order to help somebody. And that's what you're looking for, somebody who can provide that persistence. With sales professionals, some great answers: consultative, competitive, able to handle rejection, not take it personally. That's huge, and that comes from that need for structure spectrum that we were talking about, somebody who can brush off the setbacks without letting it impact their confidence. You want salespeople who are creative, persistent, quick thinking, good listeners, great. Lots of competitive. Competitive and assertive and resilience are really the key traits in sales. And then the other stuff's the nice to haves, or maybe it would just shift their style a little bit. So that's great. And now we're going to talk about behavioral interviewing, which is what everybody is here to discuss. It takes a minute. Okay, so when we're talking about behavioral interviewing, what do we mean by that? We've got traditional interview questions and then we've got behavioral interview questions. With traditional, we're oftentimes asking hypothetical situations. What would you do if? Or they tend to be closed-ended, yes or no. They can sometimes be answered in generalities. But there is a place, of course, for traditional questions. Phone screenings is a good time to use some of your basic information gathering questions. Or you might use them with somebody who has very little experience or job-specific requirements that you need. So behavioral, though, are experience-based. Now we're talking about tell me what you've done in the past. So give me a situation that you've handled in the past, because that's a great predictor of future success. For example, tell me about a time that you experienced conflict with another coworker at work. So now you're going to have them draw back on their memory to give you something that they actually did. And it includes specific behaviors. So as they're answering those questions, you're able to go back and, okay, is that assertive? Is it not assertive? Do they have the sociability that I'm looking for? Do they have the comfort with the pace that I'm looking for in the office? But the traditional questions, again, they definitely have a place. I use them in the phone screen. Oftentimes for college graduates, like just out with a lot of experience, I might ask a lot of those questions differently. So raise your hands if you have any go-to interview questions that you use all the time, that you're going to ask every single time. Great. So we have a bunch of people raising their hands, and that's great. And I definitely don't think that you should ever do away with your go-to questions. I think it's very important to establish comfort not only for the candidate but for yourself. So if you have an icebreaker question that you like to ask, or if it helps you to refer to the resume and ask a few questions from that first to kind of get things going, you should always do that because you want to keep people engaged, comfortable, and warming yourself up and the candidate up for getting into the nitty-gritty of experience-based questions. My go-to question I always ask is starting off with, tell me a little bit about yourself. It's very general, and oftentimes it can tell you a lot about a candidate. Oftentimes they do stick with professional information, job information, and they might just touch a little bit on their personal. But one time I asked that question and literally the answer took 27 minutes, which had never happened before. It's usually a good like 3 to 4 minute answer and then we're moving on. But this one took 27 minutes. He was wearing a watch that he kept hitting on the table over and over again and like pushing back in the chair and literally hitting the picture on the wall behind him. I was just thinking that was going to crash down any second. So you can learn a lot from your go-to questions. You should definitely ask them and get that information. And then we'll go on to the nitty-gritty. What do we need to know about this individual? And when you're creating your behavioral questions, you want to think of bona fide occupational questions. So these are real life work examples, things that they've done in their past jobs. Even if they're going into a new field and you know that it's not the exact same situation they're going to encounter, we all can still break things into general situations, conflict, dealing with customers, managing a problem, multitasking. So as you're setting those up, you definitely want to think about if it's a job relevant question. Also think about your culture, and we talked about that, what's needed to be successful in your company culture. I'll usually ask people, one of my go-to questions as well, is to describe their ideal work culture, which is not a behaviorally based question, but I can see if what they're looking for aligns with what we have to offer. Because if we're far apart, that's something that we can talk about, and also something to go back and think about. Is this the best candidate? Because what they're looking for is not something that we're going to be able to provide. And also this slide here, you can download this at the end of the presentation. So this has a bunch of behavioral questions that you can use to kind of pick and choose depending on the position that you're hiring for. So be sure and download that at the end. That'll be in the handout section. So we're going to talk now about designing your questions, because some of these you might change based on the job, the culture, all of that. So be thinking about those as you're designing your questions. Okay. So when we're talking behaviorally based questions, you always want to start with, tell me a time when you did A, B, or C. Tell me a time when you misunderstood someone's directions, for example, or describe what you did when you made a mistake on some paperwork, or have you ever, might be a little closed-ended depending on how you word that, but give me an example of a time when. So what you're asking them to do is draw on their past in order to answer the question so that you can decide if the way that they handled it would work for the job in your company. So you want to ask thought-provoking questions that's really going to make the candidate search for the best example. And the most important thing to do here is to be prepared to wait while they're searching their memories for the best answer. And recall can be really challenging when someone's nervous. I mean, honestly, it can be challenging for anyone. I can sometimes not remember what I had for lunch like a half an hour later. So you want to put them at ease, let them know that it's okay for them to take their time and think it over. You don't want to rush them. But most importantly, you also don't want to let them off the hook, because the silence when you're asking behavioral questions can be super uncomfortable because of the fact that they really do have to think about it and remember something. So that silence could be uncomfortable. You don't want to break it by saying, you know what, don't worry, if you can't think of anything, we'll just go on to the next question. That's not what you want to do. You want to let them know that it's okay to struggle for the answer. You'll give them time, not a problem. Because the thing is if they can't think of a work example to give you, that's a problem. That's going to kind of give you a lot of insight as well. It can be hard at first, but once you get into it and you ask those questions and give them time to answer, it definitely gets easier. So we're going to go into some tips on as you're interviewing for behavior. Of course, we want to keep the questions clear and concise. The 80-20 rule means that they should be talking 80% of the time. We should be listening 80% of the time. A lot of people will have a tendency to try to sell the position and talk a little bit too much about what we're looking for in the ideal candidate, which can kind of give them some answers too. So we want to be careful, at least in the beginning. I mean, it's okay to talk about the job and what you want, but you want to start off by gathering as much information from the candidate first. And also you want to make sure that the questions are not strung together. So ask a single question, because oftentimes when you put a bunch of stuff together, it can really increase the stress for the candidate. They're going to lose you. Also, think about the candidate that you're interviewing, because oftentimes if you're interviewing for a position where they're going to be more socially introverted, let's say it's an accounting bookkeeping job or an administrative assistant job that's going to be a little more heads down, know that if they are not social extroverts, it might take them even longer to process the information and to think about your question, because they tend to internalize everything, think things through very thoroughly before they speak. Whereas your highly social candidates they can start talking right away. They think out loud, so to speak, and they are very good at sort of faking it till they make it. So as they're talking, they're coming up with their plan. And that there might be a great place for that too. But thinking about your candidate so that if they are taking a little bit longer, you might go, okay, this makes sense given the position and the type of person that I'm hiring for. Now, if it's a salesperson who has to think quickly on their feet, you want them to really be very snappy and it takes them a long time to come up with answers, then that might be another cue for you that this is not the perfect candidate for the job. So someone who is analytical is probably going to take more time, and someone who isn't might take a little less time. So during the interview, when you're behaviorally interviewing, you want to make sure that the candidate is answering about themselves, that they're not answering the questions from a group or team perspective, so that you know that it was something that they took ownership of, that they had responsibility for and personal involvement in. So if they knew of something cool that happened on the next team over, that's not the story you want. You want to know what they did in a particular situation so that you can see if that's going to translate to your job. So basically you're asking about situations that they were in themselves. You want to listen to make sure there's not a lot of deflecting or blaming when you ask questions about failure, for example, because that could be a problem. They're going to bring that to your organization. And you do want to ask questions about both successes and failures. and mistakes. And that's okay because we all have failures, we all have mistakes. You really want to listen for how they handled that. A lot of times when we're in an interview, we sort of start by asking all of the great things that they did in their job. And that's fine, but then you don't have that perspective of what they didn't do well at and how they learned from it. So I always like to ask about those failures or challenges. Um, and I want to see what they learned from it. Did they take a mistake and go back quickly to examine what happened and learn a lesson from that? Um, you want to think when you're asking those questions about the who process. So, what did the candidate learn, or what did the candidate do? How did they do it? Would be the H, and the O is the outcome. So again, I'm sorry I couldn't fumbled that up, but what the candidate did in the example is what you're looking for, how they did it, and what the outcome was. So WHO, and you're going to look again for specifics. Specifics are the most important part of the answer. If the person generalizes everything, to me, it suggests an inability to be introspective and to continually learn from the situations that they're experiencing. Plus, you need specifics as an interviewer to understand their thought process and problem solving style. So, superficial responses leave me just pretty much in the dark. I might as well not have even interviewed them. Although I did learn that they might not have that thinking style that I'm looking for and that introspection that I'm looking for. I recently hired a marketing assistant, so we went through a bunch of interviews. And I asked her to tell me about a time she had a creative difference with a client or a manager, because this happens a lot, especially with graphic designers. And of course, she chuckled because it happens all the time. But ultimately, she said the client is the boss. In this particular situation that she gave me, though, she explained that the project to her, she just had this vision for the marketing piece that she wanted to create, and she shared it with the client, and the client disagreed, and they were, of course, they're just talking it out. And this candidate felt that based on her experience, that what the client was looking for, her version would have come out better. So I asked her what she did, and she said that she did it exactly how the client wanted it, but then she also did it her own way, and she presented both to the client. And how it worked out, which is the outcome, is that they ended up combining elements from both pieces and had the piece that they found. It was the perfect piece. So I mean, just by asking a couple of questions and going through that, I got the who, the what they did, how they did it, and what the outcome was. And I loved her answer because she felt strongly about her idea and she wanted to give her client options. So to me, she went above and beyond. She not only did it the way the client wanted it, but she also took the initiative and took her time to do it a different way. Now, I interviewed a bunch of people for this job, and she was the only one that said that for that. A lot of the answers were, I did it the way the client asked me to do it, which is not necessarily a bad answer, but I loved how this person took it a step further. And it really does show you exactly how that who strategy works. So the next thing we've got here is our Hue chart. So this is something that it is going to be something that you can download, but there are questions on here already. What I suggest that you do is when you have the questions that you like, then you can kind of create your own chart. Sometimes I just do it on a piece of paper where I'll be like, what, how, outcome with my question, so I can make notes. But you can get this as a template. And you might really like some of these questions. I use questions 2 and 3 all the time in interviews, which is tell me about a time when you faced competing deadlines and how you handled it. A lot of the positions that I've been hiring for recently really have that hectic, fast-paced need. So I like to ask that question. And then give me an example of a time when you had to step in for someone else. Or maybe give me an example of a time you went above and beyond. In fact, question 3 gave me one of the funniest, not funny responses that I remember. And this was years ago, and it really spoke volumes about her judgment. Because I said, tell me about a time you went above and beyond at work. I think I might have worded it a little differently, but the answer that I got was literally so inappropriate that I can't even share it on the webinar. But it was the example she decided to provide and showed a complete, obviously, lack of judgment to use that example in a job interview. So another trick too that we're going to go into with interviewing is the follow-up questions. And this is really kind of the key to behavioral interviewing is the follow-up. So first off, I'm definitely a very structured person. I fall on the high end of the need for structure, dot every I, cross every T, give me the rules. I like guidelines, instructions, and I'm very step by step. So when I first started doing behavioral interviews, I had a great mentor. Her name was Barbara, and she gave me my handy list of questions. So I was so excited because I had this list of questions to ask. She gave me some coaching, and then she said, then just ask your follow-up questions. And I was like, wait, what? I'm doing my first interview today, and now you're telling me about follow-up questions, and I don't have them. They're not, you didn't give me follow-up questions. So this was panic-inducing, of course. So I asked her, where are they? And she's like, don't worry, they'll come to you as you listen to their answers. And again, I'm like, wait, what? You can't do this to me. It's not how I operate. So she explained that as you listen to the answer, the follow-up questions are literally going to come because you'll see the holes in what they're saying. You'll know what else it is that you want to know, what other details you want, and those are your follow-up questions. I was massively skeptical about this, and of course I was even more nervous going into it, but I'll tell you, those follow-up questions really did just happen. It was incredible. And they were just coming to me as I'm listening to the answers. Somebody might not have provided good details. They left me wondering about the outcome. Maybe you're just not getting the kind of answer you're hoping for. Pardon me. Sorry, live webinar. So keep in mind when you're looking for that answer, if the response that you're getting is superficial, is lacking in specifics, then you're going to ask that follow-up question. Excuse me, my voice is running out. I apologize. So, but what you want to do is you don't want to put a lot of stress on the candidate. If you're not getting the answer that you want, it's really not beneficial to keep rephrasing it. Pardon me. So if they're not getting the subtlety of the question that you're asking, you're not getting at the information that you want, you can ask it a couple different ways, but then you want to let it go because you're going to end up frustrating yourself and the candidate, which we definitely want to avoid doing. So just know that you actually are walking away with the information that you need. It wasn't the information you were hoping for that you wanted, but it will help you make a decision because perhaps that person really doesn't have the level of specifics and detail that you need for them to bring to this job. So you will definitely walk away with a lot from people who struggle to answer. And the reason I say that is because we have to remember that interviews are not interrogations. So we want to put that candidate at ease, make them feel comfortable. And a lot of times in the interview, people are really going to give themselves away. So you'll know. I have a fun video for everyone to watch that is the example of what not to do in an interview. So we're going to watch that real quick.
Can you describe your ideal job, workplace, or culture for me?
That's easy. The job that gets me paid, baby. What? Yeah. 5-inch heels, short, tight skirt, pa-dow, boom, popping everywhere. I love the team atmosphere. Friday night, we would go out to the club and the manager would come out with us. We'd be popping bottles. What? I believe in everyone being together. So I love that about my last job. Sometimes I may come in late, I may leave early. Throw your hands up. I get them there on time, but I might not be here on time. You understand, you're a woman. I'm in control. Janet Jackson. Oh yeah, you can also ask my boss about that. I'm just joking. That's not how I got the job. Okay, can we take a picture? Facebook?
Do you wish every interview was as obvious as this one? Use the Omnia profile and discover the behaviors behind the resume. Hire right the first time.
Okay, so that was a little fun video on somebody who made it very easy to make a hiring decision. Now, I've actually had a couple of situations like this, so it's always nice when it's just the job has been made easy for you. It might be a little shocking, but at least you were able to go, okay, I'm making a good decision by not hiring this person. I once asked somebody to talk about, I can't exactly remember how I worded the question, but it was about staying late for phone calls because oftentimes we have clients globally, so you might get put on a call that goes past when you would ordinarily leave. And he had made a comment about, I'm very fast paced, except on a Friday before a 3-day weekend. I might not take that last call because I'm tired and I want to go home. Like that was his answer to the question. So I was like, okay, well, thank you very much. I said, well, we all get tired sometimes. I was in shock and didn't know what to say, but clearly he was not going to be the best candidate for the job. So, but when they aren't easy, behavioral interviewing is the best way to go, asking questions to see what they did in their past and how they're going to bring it to their hopefully future with your organization. So I'd like to open it up for questions. If you have any questions about the webinar today, behavioral interviewing, the Omnia profile, assessing behaviors, go ahead and you can type questions and comments down below. I'm going to put up the last slides here so that you can see your handouts, your takeaways. Over here on the left, we've got interview questions. You can download the slides for the presentation and also the hiring process sample that I was talking about before. All of this you can go ahead and take if you'd like. And then if you have any questions, go ahead and type them now. I'd like to stay on and answer any questions that you have. And if not, I hope you have a great day. I hope you learned a lot today. I apologize for losing my voice at the end there. And I look forward to, we have a couple of questions coming in. So how long do our interviews last? What we do here is I do a initial phone screen. A lot of the positions that we hire for have to talk to clients on the phone. So I always do a phone screen first if they're going to have contact on the phone. And then we do an initial interview. I always use a partner with that. That way, after the interview, I can talk over my partner's perceptions compared to mine to see if we're on the same page. That interview will last anywhere from 30 minutes to 1 hour. 30 minutes is typically when it's not an ideal candidate, and closer to 1 hour, and sometimes it'll go even to an hour and a half if it's a candidate we really like and we've got a great connection, we're learning a lot of information. So oftentimes I find that the interviews are longer if it's a good candidate, shorter if it's not. And then we have a second interview with the hiring manager. So that person, so basically we're sending our shortlist selections to the hiring manager who will conduct a follow-up interview, and that interview typically lasts an hour as well. And can we get the video? Yes, absolutely. The video is on our YouTube for Omnia Group. I will see if we can get Paula Marie to I don't know if you have that link, Paula Marie, but it's definitely on our YouTube channel. So if you YouTube the Omnia group, all of our webinars and videos will come up. That's a super fun video. And Tanya, who's in that video, does a lot of webinars. She's great, tons of energy, as you can imagine. So be sure to look for her webinars in the future.